Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy right here. This is the Hogue Knives Microflip. First off, I want to thank very much my Patreon patrons for basically allowing me to see a $130 knife and go, you know what, yeah, I should put that on the channel, and then ordering it and being, able to do so. It is a beautiful thing that they allow the channel to happen, so thank you, patrons. Next thing, size comparison. This is called the Microflip. It is not, however, a micro knife. Here it is against the Spyderco PM2 and the Spyderco Delica. We can see here that in terms of overall length, the blade is actually about the same length on the Delica here, and it is, again, that ain't freaking micro. I own some micro knives, and that ain't it. Here it is against the Ontario Rat number 2, so again, we're very, very similar in terms of overall size to the Delica, to the Rat, so do keep that in mind. And then actually, we'll look at the thickness of this guy, because it is a little bit on the thicker side. If we look at this guy next to the Delica here, we can see it's a little bit on the thick side, and in terms of overall size in the pocket, we're actually not that far apart. So, yeah, anyways, there's your size comparison. Next thing, Hogue. So Hogue is actually, they are a company that I think mostly does stuff in the firearms world. They do like grips and things like that, I think. But nevertheless, they are actually one of the rare exceptions to the adage that, knives made by companies that don't mostly make knives tend to be not so great. Hogue actually has a very, very respectable knife-making division, despite the fact that a lot of their work happens outside of knives. Every time I've handled some of their stuff, it's just like, yeah, these guys do good work. And so they are definitely a good company and one to watch. And so that's a beautiful thing. And then finally, actually, no, there's nothing else final. So let's go on ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly. This very interesting little knife right here. So on the good side, to start with, I do like the size. Even though they call it micro, I call this a good normal size. And for a lot of people, it'll come in under legal lines, and that's a great thing. So I think it's a nice size, and it's also reasonably compact in the pocket. It's not a big knife generally, and so it's relatively easy to carry in that way, and it's relatively lightweight as well. If I grab my scale here, we're to see this guy coming in at 2.97 inches. It's a little bit over an ounce an inch, but nevertheless, it's a pretty solid little piece in terms of its lightness. I'm pretty happy with that, so that's good. Next thing, this guy has an ambidextrous clip. You can see here that this clip can either mount on this side right here, or over here you have a little spacer that you can flop around there, and so that can be a nice thing, especially because button locks tend to be relatively friendly for left-handed people. That makes this very close to being and especially with this lock right here, allowing you to lock the knife open, lock the knife open. This means that a lefty can use this knife without really any risk, and so this is a fully ambidextrous knife, and that's a beautiful thing. Next thing, this guy is textured well, such that it will absolutely stay in your hand. There is really no risk of this guy going anywhere. Between all of this jimping going on back here, all of the jimping here, all of the little cutouts in the back here, this guy is really not going anywhere, and that's a beautiful thing. It really allows you to use this knife in a way that you don't have to worry about, oil and etc. That's a beautiful thing. Next thing, this guy has a very nice little blade. It is CPM 154, which is a beautiful little steel, and it actually is reasonably thin behind the edge here. It comes to a nicely thin grind. It almost feels like a slightly hollowish grind. I'm trying to see, yeah, I think it is hollowish. It's not super hollow. It's not, oh my god, but it's, it's a good little grind here. And CPM 154, in case I already didn't mention that, is a good-to-go sort of steel. It's not the absolute upper echelon, but for $130, it doesn't necessarily need to be, but it is a good-to-go sort of steel. And CPM 154, by the way, is the powder metallurgy version of 154 CM, so the performance is a little bit increased, I think, for most people in everyday life relative to that. Next thing, the price on this guy seems actually pretty fair. We're at $130 here, and that gives you a bunch of different options. You can get like Wharncliffe blade, etc. There are a bunch of possibilities here, a bunch of different colors, but I think it's an absolutely fine price point for this. None of the construction and whatnot all seems pretty much in line for all of that, and that's a great thing. It's also made in the States, which is for some people an independent piece of good, but for that price point, you know what? I'm not going to really object too hard. I think that's a reasonable price on this guy. And so that's good. Then finally, on the good side, this guy is a button lock. A lot of people look at this and go, Nick, oh my God, automatic. No, not at all. This is not an auto. In fact, although it has a very strong detent, so it's very hard for me to show this off. Once I am out of the detent's range, this is fully a manual pocket knife here. There is no point. It feels a little bit like an assist. And in fact, this is one of the biggest screw-ups I've made in my career as a reviewer, short of getting into watches, which is by far my biggest one. But nevertheless, in my original review of a similar knife from Hogue, I actually believed the knife was assisted because it has that hallmark of you need to push it shut a little bit at the end there. But no, that's just the nature of the button lock. And so that is sort of, it is very much a manual knife. And there is no real assist to it. It just has a detent that is so damn good that it feels like it should be assisted. But anyway, so it's not an automatic. It's just a button lock manual knife. But it has this button lock, and button locks are actually quite nice because A, they're very easy to use. You know, a lot of people, it feels very intuitive for them. And so that's good. It also has a lock open here. You can see here that the button lock is actually very prominent when the knife is open. That's maybe not something I'm super in love with. However, it has this lock which allows you to shut the button lock. There is no way that this blade can come shut right now with this lock engaged. And so that's a safety measure that I think is a nice thing that they've provided there. So that's good. And I like seeing more button locks. Honestly, button lock flippers is something that, you know, I think are a little bit less explored. You get like the Protec Ferrum Forge Master Drop Mordex. There really aren't that many. The Protec Cambria. There just aren't that many people doing it. The Thai Tac 2 Tanto. But they can have really nice detents when done well, and it's good to see them done well here. So that's a beautiful thing. And so actually that is the good, is that it is a button lock, which I think is a very nice thing. It has actually a reasonable price on this guy, a very nice little blade with a thin blade, thin edge, etc. It stays very easily in the hand. It has an ambidextrous clip, and frankly, the knife itself is pretty much fully ambidextrous, and it is very nicely sized, at least in my estimation of the world. On the grate side, actually the grate is very easy here. Let me shut the window as a big semi-truck pulls into the complex. Oh, the joys. The great thing about this knife, absolutely 100%, is the action. Oh my God, is the action on this thing good. I'm going to try not to flip this. Yeah, it didn't work. The detent on this guy is beautifully tuned. It is beautifully strong. It reliably fires every time without a whole lot of pain. This detent, this action, this fire open is on par with some of the very best of detents in my collection. You know, it makes the detent on this Herman feel very, very, feel a little bit on the soft side. It is not so far from the detent on the Grimsmo Norseman. Certainly the action on the close is very, very different, but the detent on this guy is on point. If every detent, if every action for a flipping knife were this satisfying, God, would the world be a beautiful thing. There are very, very few actions that are more satisfying than on this little knife right here. This is a perfect 10 out of 10 for deployment action. Oh my God, is this thing good in that domain, and I like that very much. So to me at least, that's what's good here that's what's great here is the action. The action is just on point and beautiful. On the bad side. To start with, one thing I do kind of wish is that this button were a little bit more recessed. Very often you will see in button lock style knives, there is sort of a groove down here, and then the button sits inside that groove. What this allows you to basically do is press because right now if I press this knife against the table, it's actually, okay, it hasn't quite unlocked. Oh, no, it did unlock there. That is something that basically pressure on this will unlock the knife, and given you have this lock, so it's not a huge deal, but I kind of wish that this button were recessed down into a groove, which would mean that you have to a little bit more straightforwardly kind of push your thumb down into there to disengage the button, rather than this guy, where it is reasonably prominent. So there you go. Hold on, I gotta close the other window now because the jackass is backing up. Ay, ay, ay. The joys of apartment living, right? Anyways, so that's, I kind of wish that they had a groove there and would just lose the safety as a result, because you wouldn't need it then. Next thing, this has a two-stage close. What I mean by that is that this knife, a lot of button locks can actually be kind of flopped shut in this sort of way, where you just kind of compress the button lock and flick it in there. On this guy, you can occasionally do that, but you really have to be very strong and spirited in your closing. Most of the time, the way that I tend to close these knives, it kind of gets caught right here as you get the button lock to press back into position. There is sort of a last little bit of shove that you need. So unless you really put a bunch of force into it, most of the time, you're going to close this guy in two stages. One to get it to this position, and then a pinch shut. Is it a terrible thing? No, absolutely not. But it doesn't have the same kind of fidgetable, drop-shutty-tude of some button locks where it's just like completely unsuspended. With an action this good, I ain't complaining, but it's just something you keep in mind there. Next thing, this guy definitely has jimping directly under the flipper tab. If we take a look here, as you slide your finger off of this flipper tab, you are landing directly onto this jimping. This knife is jimped. There is no real problem with jimping at all, and in fact, these little bits of jimp back here don't do a damn thing for me. So why am I landing on them? This is a lot like preparing a landing zone for a parachutist by installing a bunch of tower lamps and glass shards. It's just, no, you want to land on something soft and comfortable, and this ain't it. So I really wish that this jimping wasn't here. One of the things is that this knife is pocket pecking like crazy. Now, again, the action is really good. I'm a little reluctant to tell, but the thing is, this is going to be pecking on whatever is in your pocket all damn day long. So if you're carrying this in the pocket with your phone, this is going to be trying to take your phone out. They've chamfered the edges of the tab here, but this is really prominent. I kind of hope that they can find a way to make that flipper tab a little bit more low-key in the future than this little guy right here, which is pretty insane. So, there you go. And frankly, I'm not a huge fan of the flipper tab shape anyways, because this is kind of push-buttony, and yet you're pressing directly down onto this pointed surface. I don't know. But, you know, at the end of the day, it works, so whatever. Next thing, ergonomics aren't great for me. I have smaller hands than most, and of course, ergos tend to be pretty subjective, but for me, this guy, there were a lot of hot spots, partly because it's going to be stuck in your hand and whatnot. But the clip is very, very tall on this guy. And just frankly, it doesn't I'm a little bit further away from the blade than I like to be. It's just, And then in the back here, and then this part right here, we'll talk about, actually next. But just generally speaking, the ergos on this knife are someplace between challenging and bad. I just don't care for the ergos here. It doesn't work all that super well. Then finally, on the bad side, the backspacer. So look, the backspacer, I believe, was not misinstalled. I believe this works exactly as it's supposed to do here, but the thing is, it goes from perfectly flush down here to sticking out at the edges back here. Now, I bet that they've got some crazy high-speed, low-drag tactical reason in mind for this. Like, oh, that's for breaking the windows out of a Humvee or something like that. I bet that they've probably cooked something up like that. Maybe if this is a hardened backspacer, then this would be able to break glass or something like that. Okay, sure. But the thing is, in practice, what it actually is it's a sharp surface that's going to be pressing against your hand as you flip this knife open. And so I'm not a big fan. It looks like the backspacer was just installed wrong. Like I said, I don't believe that to be the case, because after this point, it feels like it's installed perfectly. So I think this was a design decision, but I think it was not a great one. At least from my estimation, I don't really see this as being... I don't know. That doesn't do it for me. And so you end up with a backspacer that is going to be constantly poking into your hand as you're flipping this knife, and it's a knife you're going to want to flip because, oh my God, is this action amazing. And so the backspacer on this guy is just sort of a disappointment. I thought it was a mistake at first. Now I'm convinced it might be a different kind of mistake. So, to me at least, that's what's bad here, is that the backspacer fitment is really awkward and not great. The ergos on the knife overall actually aren't that great. It is pocket pecking like crazy with a weirdly shaped flipper tab. The flipper is right above jimping here. It is a two-stage close, and I do wish that the button was recessed a little bit for safety. On the ugly front, two issues. To start with, right here. Where do we got here? Do not disassemble the knife. Your Hogue knife was professionally assembled and adjusted for lifetime operation, with the exception of reversing the clip or removing the scales on appropriate fixed-blade models. Any attempt at disassembly voids the knife's warranty. Hogue, really? Really? You're selling hard-use tools here. You're selling high-speed, low-drag tactical stuff. You're including oil. And you're telling me that any attempt to disassemble the knife will screw everything up. Guys, come on. You can do better than that. And in fact, it's a few standard deviations behind everybody else in the industry who have realized that you need to treat your customers like intelligent human beings and whatnot, and allow them to maintain the tools that they love. Guys, don't do it. Just, no, lose that. That's ugly, 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 ugly. And the fact that that's one of the very first interactions you have with the company is you take this guy out of the pouch, not so impressive. Guys, do better. The other issue on this guy is the clip. The clip just isn't very good. what we can see here is that this is sort of a bent spring clip, but they've done this thing where they try and loop it back around underneath, and as a result, you don't end up with all that much in the way of actual ramp. Generally, you know, a good pocket clip will do something like this, where there is actually a fair amount of ramp that will allow it'll catch the material you pocket and feed it into that channel, whereas this guy is just sort of a wall. You press this into your pocket, and sooner or later, this will either lift up or slide into your pocket on the other direction, and that's just not great. And it's also a very tall clip, which is good if you're wearing super thick pockets, except this is very tall as well, and so if you've got thick pockets, it's just going to be extra. This is just not a great clip. I feel like they could have done this much better with a more conventionally shaped clip that goes up in the front there, offers a little bit of ramp, and then the clip itself could have been a little bit less tall, and as a result, the knife would have been more ergonomic. This clip is, to me at least, it's a loss. I don't care for this clip really at all. I really wish they'd done better, and it's billboarded to boot. Like, guys, no. So, to me, those are the ugly things. That the clip just isn't very good. It works, it's okay, I guess, but it's a loss in every meaningful way. And that part of the warranty disassembly, around the disassembly, any attempted disassembly, voiding the warranty, guys, do better. Everybody else has. So those are the ugly things. Final conclusion. Look, at some level, this is a knife with a stellar action. It is one of the very best manual flippers out there right now, and certainly in this kind of a price bracket, it's really, really good. And you know what? It also has a nice little blade and a pretty reasonable price to go with it. I think if you are a big fan of deployment action, whoa there, this is absolutely not something, this is something you should consider. This is an exceptionally high point in deployment action. The close is a little weird. Like I said, it's a bit strange to close. It does pocket peck like crazy with so-so ergos, a weird backspacer, a warranty policy that, no. And a clip that really just doesn't work that well, but it does have that stellar action. But this is actually kind of one of those knives that makes me question a little bit my own feelings, my own intuitions about the review world, because this is so exceptional in one very particular domain. This is a knife that is so exceptional in terms of opening action as to be really, really notable. Right, this is a really impressive little piece here. There is so much to love about this opening action here. And I do consider myself, generally speaking, to be an action snob. One of the things I do demand from a nice, especially on a higher-end pocket knife, is an excellent opening action. And this one is towards the top of the pack. In that domain, this guy satisfies supremely. And so as an action snob, you might think, oh, well, this is going to still win, right? But ultimately, this reminds me that I am also a rest of the knife snob, too. A great action is a joy, but it's not enough alone. It's not enough to have a great action if you've got a bunch of other things. And so I find myself feeling a little bit unsatisfied and frustrated here. This is a knife that I very much want to like because it does one thing really, really well. And, you know, there were a couple of other things that it's doing pretty credibly. But ultimately, because of those other issues, it ends up leaving me a little bit cold. And so if you are after a mega flip, more than anything else, if you are after that action, then you know what? Give it a consideration. I think there is enough here in that domain that it's a really nice piece. And I think with some tweaks, this could be substantially improved. The Microflip X2, I don't know that it's actually an ordinal number, but well, nevertheless, the X2, get rid of the damn spacer here. You know, there were a couple of little things that could make this guy so much better and could make it an absolutely amazing knife. But as it stands, although I think there's a lot to love, I'm not necessarily sure most people are going to be flipping for this little guy right here. So anyways, there you go. Hope this is interesting to you and have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.